Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Nicole, and on today's episode, we're focusing on ways we can support our own needs and address common challenges that come up on the journey of raising our children. I've got my friend and colleague, Dr. Kim Swales, with us today, and we're going to tackle a variety of issues that most of us have to navigate at one point or another. Remember that when we're managing ourselves, meeting our own emotional needs, setting boundaries that work for us, it also helps our kids. So before we dive into this conversation, let me tell you a bit about Kim. She earned her PhD in marriage and family communication with a concentration in counseling from Ohio University over 27 years ago. She then went on to do postdoctorate studies in counseling. Dr. Swales was formerly a researcher and college professor at the University of Houston, but is now in private practice as a parenting, marriage, relationship, and life coach. She has published research on gender communication, friendship, family, and marital communication, and relationship maintenance. She speaks to schools and organizations several times a year on parenting, relationships, and marriage. And on the personal side, she's been married for 25 years and has 3 children of her own. So she brings a real life perspective to her practice and certainly to the things that we're going to talk about today. Kim, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
So we're going to cover sort of a wide range of topics, things that you and I have had conversations about, things we've posted about on social media, kind of a smorgasbord of stuff that I think is really going to resonate with the listeners, especially the moms and dads who are in the trenches with kids. But before we get to that, I'd love to just have you share a little bit about your own story, how you got interested sort of in all things relationships, right?
Yeah.
Kids, parenting, marriage, all that stuff.
I love when people ask me that because my journey to this field really came from a difficult time. My own parents separated and divorced when I was in middle school, early high school. It was a long process from their separation to when their divorce is final. And it was extraordinarily painful. I grew up in a very Catholic community, went to Catholic grade school, high school, and college. And there was only one other kid in my class who was divorced. And I felt whose parents were divorced. I felt such shame, and it was difficult. My parents' divorce was ugly and bitter. And so, Nicole, we went from having truly and I know now as an adult, it couldn't have been this way, but it felt like from the kids' perspective, this fairy tale family. We ate dinner together every night. We took bike rides. Sunday was family day. And then boom, dad had an affair, left. Everything was turned upside down, and it was really traumatic, and we suffered a lot. And so when I went to college, I really wanted to study actually broadcast journalism. I kind of wanted to be the next Katie Couric.
I totally see that, actually.
And I loved it. I really loved it. But I took a class and I was a double major with communication and psychology. And I loved my psychology classes, but I had a class in interpersonal communication. And I loved my professor, Dr. Sharon Kirk. And she just introduced me that there was this whole field where not that you can just study psychology, but that you can study relationships, interpersonal relationships and interpersonal communication. And I combined the two. I just thought, gosh, if I could help families either not get to that point of this traumatic, difficult divorce, or if that is going to happen, help them repair and rebuild, I could help people. And I just knew that that's what I was being called to do. And so once I got that introduction through that professor and through that class, there was no turning back. And I took kind of a different route. I think that's one of the things I love about you is we've kind of added, and I mean, my doctorate actually is in family communication. So I had to go do extra schooling to get the certifications for counseling and to do the counseling work. So, I mean, it really came from this need inside of me, this desire to help other families.
Oh, I love that. And I so appreciate you sharing that. I think so many people can relate either with what they experienced growing up or with perhaps what they're navigating or have had to deal with in their own marriages, partnerships, and relationships. And so, I love what you said about how when we can use the knowledge and the skills and the experiences that we have to help other people going through that, whether it's to prevent that or to repair and help people through that. That's so powerful.
Yeah.
And, I think there's so many places in parenting where this issue of our communication and relationship with our parenting partner can come up and be a challenge, right? Whether we're married, whether we're divorced, whether we're, co-parenting in whatever way, it's tough when it comes to kids, right? Because we want to be on the same page. We want to be aligned, but there's lots of stuff to navigate with kids. There's lots of decisions that need to be made, like everything from what do we feed our kids to where do we send them to school to how do we, discipline them and manage things. And it's something that I see in virtually every family that comes into my clinic, that's something that inevitably comes up from one or both parents around like, I don't know that we're doing this great. Or one parent, usually a mom will be like, how do I get my co-parent on the same page? How do I get my husband or my partner or whoever on the same page with me? And I think you have such a unique background and expertise in communication, all that, to help us think through that, because I know there's so many parents listening who are like, yeah, that's me. I know where I stand on things. I spend a lot of time on Instagram. I do a lot of research. I know what I think is important for my kid, but I can't necessarily get my co-parent to agree. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
It is so hard. It's a great point that you bring up. And I don't know that I've ever talked about this on my podcast or on any other. So I'm actually really glad you're asking this question, but it's something I see constantly in my practice. And often it'll come up, a couple will be sitting in my office and the husband goes, oh, you're the one. My wife sends me all your Instagram posts, in this not so subtle way that they need to sort of change the way that they think about parenting. But it's really hard if you're battling over the specifics of the issue, and if you're battling over the issue in the moment. And so what I have families do, what I have parenting partners do, is take a big step back, probably takes 10 steps back. And I have them start with 2 exercises. One is I have them make a mission statement for either their marriage or their family, just like you might do for a company or a business, or anything that any personal endeavor that you're starting. Is I have them, and I give them some models of mission statements, but I really try to get them to come up with their own. And I've had couples over the years that come in with a painting or a poem, but I have them sit down and collaborate on what do they really want for first their relationship. Then we extend it to their family. What do they want for their family? And I have them do some values exercises that I have where they really, and they do it in steps. They first just kind of individually brainstorm what their top values are. That could be faith, education, a hard work ethic, being community minded, environmental, there's so many things that it could be, being fiscally responsible. So they just kind of brainstorm their own values, and then they work as a couple and they sit down and they talk about what their values are. And then the next step would be combining their values. Okay, well, these are yours and these are mine. And what do we want that to look like for our kids and for our family? And then I have them, and honestly, Nicole, this is what my husband and I did early on. I was on bed rest when I was pregnant with my oldest son, and I had seen, I don't know what I was watching, Dateline or something, Diane Sawyer. I remember Diane Sawyer interviewing dads about not being involved in parenting. And I just kind of had this light bulb moment. And so I remember asking my husband, I was literally 8 months pregnant with my oldest son. And I said, what values do you want? We knew we were naming him Will. What values do you want Will to have? And he said, the value of $1. I want him to have a good work ethic. We lived in a neighborhood where teenagers were very entitled. None of them had part-time jobs. They didn't babysit. They got brand new cars on their 16th birthday. And he said, I really want our kids to have a good work ethic, and I want them to not be in credit card debt, and I want them to save, and I want them to teach them financial and work values. And that wasn't at the top of my list. But we sat down and we said, okay, what does that look like? How do we do that? And so we kind of started like, okay, they see us working hard. We give them chores early on. In our family, we have a rule. It's being broken right now. It's a flexible rule. And I'll talk about that actually in a little bit, but that our kids get a job when they're 15. We want them to know what it's like to clock in and clock out, to have to manage their time, to have to fill out tax forms. So when we start at what our core values are, you don't argue about those little things because you sort of have this template. And not to say that you never see it a little differently in the day-to-day functioning of that. But I think to step back and remind yourself, you are with this person most likely because you have shared values of how you want to move forward in life and how you want to raise citizens of the world. And so when my husband and I would butt heads about how to handle things, we could go back to those values and say, this is our value. And what's the best way to teach, model, encourage, support that value for our kids?
I love it. Such great practical tools for that. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking, what a great thing to help anchor parents in the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we do disagree on some of the details, or maybe we have differences of opinion over certain areas, but in the big picture, we both want the same things for our kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that often gets lost in the minutia of like the arguments or the negotiations or the criticisms or whatever around like how we're doing these specific things. We lose that bigger perspective that you're talking about, which is, wait a second, we both actually have the same goal here, which is to raise responsible, healthy, well-adjusted, kids into adulthood. And if you're not with someone who has that as a value, then yes, that's something really important
Right?
to like identify, right? But I think to remind ourselves, like what I kept thinking when you were talking about like those exercises is we're on the same team here.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of maybe some differences we have, we both actually want the same things for our kids.
Mm-hmm. And then there are times when to use that team analogy, my husband's head coach and I'm assistant coach. And there are times I'll use that going back to that financial example of my husband really he's better with money. Mm-hmm. He loves investments in the stock market, and he is more in charge of our bills and our financial future. And so when our kids got to a certain age, kind of going along with that fiscal responsibility, he became head coach. He taught them about retirement accounts. He gave all three of our kids a little bit of money when they got into middle school to teach them about the stock market, and they pick stocks and they trade. And he kind of takes head coach on that. If our kids are having relationship problems, I'm the head coach. My husband defers to me. He doesn't even pretend to be kind of the expert in that field. And so to give and take and let the other person step up and you step back and and that's so good for your kids, because if you try to run the show on everything, and your co-parent doesn't really have a chance to lead and model, then you're kind of robbing them of that relationship.
Yeah, that idea of where does each of us shine? What are the skills that we have, the knowledge, the unique experiences that we have that we bring to it, and allowing each other to take that head coach, position with things. And I think this is a broad stereotype, but in my own just personal and clinical experience, this rings true that often moms have a hard time giving over some of that control, of letting their parenting partner step up and take the lead on some things. And I noticed that particularly in situations where moms are clearly the primary parent and decision maker for the child, especially when the child maybe has some extra challenges or needs. I see a lot of times moms becoming almost like possessive of, this is my project, my thing, like don't mess it up, don't do something the wrong way. And that can really alienate our parenting partner and really prevent the child from having the benefits that that other parent brings to their life, to decision making.
I talked about this on another podcast. I don't know if it was mine or somebody else's, but that going back to that Diane Sawyer Dateline or whatever it was, that when I was on bed rest at 8 months pregnant, I saw that's exactly what it was. It was about how women want, in particular, their partner, their spouse, to take up some of the parenting responsibility and slack. Yet when they do, if they don't do it our way, we criticize them. And then they're like, they throw their hands up in the air and they're like, well, I'm not going to help with homework because you don't like the way I do it. I'm not going to help with dinner because you don't like what I feed them. And so seeing this before I even had kids and being in this field, and at the time I was a professor at the University of Houston, I was teaching gender communication and I was teaching family communication. And I had this light bulb moment like, yes, if we want our partners to truly be a parenting partner, we have to accept that they're not going to always do it the same way as ours, and that our way is not always better. And so when I asked my husband about his values, I also said, at that time, I was a professor, he was in corporate America. And if you've ever been in academia, you know, even full-time is kind of very flexible and part-time. So I was going to be home a whole lot more with our son than he was. But I said, I want you to pick something that's yours. And he said, bath time. I want to be bath man. And so we started when we registered for our baby registry. He picked all the hooded towels, the bath toys, the soaps and shampoos and whatever we had. He was completely in charge of bath for all three of our kids. That was their time. I couldn't get involved if they made a huge mess or if bath didn't happen every night. Like I totally let go of that and let that be his thing. And then slowly I could incorporate that into other areas. But I think if parents can do that, if parenting partners can say, I don't have to be in charge of it all, and I don't have to love the way my partner does it, but if I want them to do it, I've got to let them do it their way.
Oh, so good. And, I think one of the interesting things around that's hard, it's so true. Oftentimes, and again, often moms, but it could be either. It's like, I need time. I know I read about self-care. I need to divide things up more. I need to take care of myself, but it's the logistics then of like, okay, that means being willing to give up some things. And we like having that control because it sort of in the moment soothes our anxieties, but we burn ourselves out, don't we? Like parents, if you are a parent who is constantly trying to micromanage everything, take it all on, do it all, there is burnout. And then there is increased resentment and, anxiety and hostility. And that's not good for our relationship with our partner or with our co-parent, but it also isn't good for kids.
No, I mean, my kids have this, they're so close to their dad, and bath time. I mean, I was there sometimes, often. I mean, sometimes I wasn't. Sometimes that was my 30 minutes to go for a walk or be quiet or clean up the kitchen or whatever. But most of the time I wanted to be there. But I think about like he read every Harry Potter book from 1 to 9 or however many with each of those kids. And they have these special memories of their time with their dad that if I had gotten in there would have changed that. And that's just one small example, but you do give up control, but in the long run, it's so good for your kids because every relationship has different things to offer. And you're really cheating your kids and your partner if you're not allowing them to take over some parts of parenting.
We're going to shift gears in a moment and talk about some boundaries, but for people listening who are like, I get this makes perfect sense. And my co-parent and I are already, I'm feeling like we're quite a ways down the path of this being contentious, us not being able to come together on these things. I'm curious, based on your work with relationships, with couples, with communication, if you can give our listeners, what are some of the red flags or what are some of the things that you think are an indicator that, you know what, it's really time for you to get yourself in somebody's office or doing telehealth or working with a professional to help you navigate these things? Because I find that often by the time a parent is in here like acknowledging this, it's really, really far down the path. So what are some of the signs for moms and dads to be aware of that, maybe we should get some help around how we're navigating this or how we're communicating with one another?
That's an excellent question. And I think it becomes this really quick decline sometimes, but if you find yourself feeling angry, like doing those things together, if you find yourself dreading bath time or dinner time or going to extracurricular activities. I've worked with families where maybe dad gets really loud on the sidelines, or mom. I had one couple that it was mom, and they would dread going to their kids' sports games because the other parent was going to be so self-conscious and embarrassed about kind of the yelling and stuff that would come out on the sidelines. And so if you're starting to feel anger, resentment, dread around family activities that should feel really good to do together, you brought up an excellent point. If you don't feel like a team, I have so many couples in my practice, some that are married, some aren't married, some with kids, some without, that, feel like they're constantly butting heads. It's me against them. He got his way, so now I'm going to get my way. Keeping score, if you're keeping score, because I think that's a good indicator. I think keeping score or not keeping score is a good barometer of the health of a relationship. I know even in my own, gosh, it's almost 26 years now. As you were reading my intro in December, it'll be December 2nd, 26 years. There are times when there's no scoreboard. I don't even pay attention. But there are times when I start to feel resentment and like I'm keeping score. And then I know, okay, we're off balance here. We're not on the same team. We're keeping score against each other. So when you start to have those feelings, that's a really good time to get some help.
I think that's a great, really tangible barometer of that, really, really helpful for people to think about. So let's shift gears a bit and let's talk about sort of along these same lines of managing our own stress, our own resentment, our own, energy and experience of all that. I want to talk about a few things boundary related, because I think this is such a big issue for so many parents. Again, moms especially, but certainly for dads as well. So let's start out with boundaries around school stuff. We're in the back to school, season, navigating that. And one of the things that I see come up for parents and for families, especially when the child has some challenges, is around when things aren't going well in school. Maybe, there's problems, there's lots of notes home, there's, just challenges to navigate. And a big one that I see in families is when kids come home with just reams of homework, all of this stuff, especially for kids with developmental or mental health issues who have struggled to manage through the entire day at school. And now parents are left like, okay, now we've got hours of struggles. Even if the assignment is supposed to be 20 minutes, it's going to take the entire evening fighting and battling. And I see the amount of stress that things like that related to school can cause, not only for kids, but for parents and between parents. And so I know that you and I are both advocates of parents figuring out what's healthy and workable for our family, for our child, for our situation, particularly around homework. You and I have had, this conversation, but it could be around, extracurriculars, how many things we're involved in, whatever. So what are some of the factors for parents to consider around how do I know if something that's going on with our child's school related or with the decisions we've made with extracurriculars? How do we know if that's a good thing, if we should pull back? And then how do we set boundaries around that, especially with something like homework where people feel like, well, we have to do this.
Yeah. I love that question. And honestly, it's a very similar approach that I talked about in the beginning. I think that when you look at your family's values and you really have figured out what they are, you can adjust accordingly. And then, so you need to look at your family values first. I think look at your individual child, and then Other factors to consider are family time. What
Mhm.
is when you talk about extracurricular, what's your budget? What's your child's personality? What's their ability? What's their interest? One example I can think of is, I'll give you two examples in our family. I told you already about our kids have to have a job when they're 15. And so that's looked really differently for all three of my kids. For my oldest son, who does have some ADHD, actually having a job helped him manage his time better. There were bumps in the beginning for sure, but once we kind of really taught him some executive functioning skills and some organization, it really helped him. In fact, he's in grad school now, and I insisted. He got a job and he loves it, and he's so happy, and it's helping him be productive in other areas, because the more that his time is sort of accounted for, the better he manages it. Anyway, our boys, one of my boys just said, well, Kate's 15, our youngest. Does she have a job yet, Mom? Well, Kate dances 7 days a week, and there's no time really for her. We thought, like, when could she possibly work? She really would love to be a professional dancer. So the ages from 15 to 18, you have to dance 7 days a week if you would like to be a professional dancer. So we've adjusted that accordingly for her. So what does it look like? Well, she's babysitting, she's volunteering, she works as a helper at her dance studio. So there are other ways she's getting those same life lessons, but it doesn't look exactly how it looked for our older two, who were lifeguards at the recreation center down the street. Their schedules have allowed for that a little bit more. So you look at your values, you look at your child, you look at what's working for your family, and you have to be flexible. And, we've had a similar thing with our son. You asked about extracurricular activities. I think as a professional, my professional recommendation is to enroll your kids, if you have the time, the resources, the interest, in one activity for their brain and one activity for their body. So what that might look like is somebody does baseball and chess club, or gymnastics and violin, or theater and, running track. And especially as little kids, expose them to lots and lots of things. And I remember we kind of had this rule that you have to move your body. You have to be in some sort of sport or physical activity. It doesn't have to be a team sport. It doesn't have to be football or baseball. It could be taekwondo, or, walking or running, but you had to move your body. And my middle son, all my kids are tiny, but my middle son, he's very athletic. But when he got to high school, and he was 97 pounds playing lacrosse, which he was great. He was fast, but he was not big. And Nicole, he was getting the pulp beat out of him. He was getting concussions. It was not safe for him. And so he came to us and said, I love sports, but please don't make me play. And that was our rules. Like, you have to play a sport in high school. It was not right for him. And so we had to adjust that and say, okay, as long as you're going to do other things that are healthy for you. And so I think when you feel things get out of balance, you look at so when I talk about that family values exercise, it shouldn't be this rigid template that you put on all kids, because kids are going to have special needs. Kids are going to have academic challenges or physical challenges or emotional health challenges. And you look at that child and say, okay, this kid needs it to be a little bit different for them. But how can we still have those values show up in other ways? So they may not get a job at 15, but they might do volunteer work or take a leadership role. They may not play a sport in high school, but they, go down the street on the weekend and work out at our weekly YMCA, or, So I think being flexible, being open, listening to your children, listening to your partner, and then constantly re-examining your values, because they change too.
So true. And the saying, that the thing that I say to families that's coming to my mind as you're speaking is, things, to be fair, aren't necessarily equal. And especially where there's multiple kids in the family, everybody's needs get met. That doesn't mean it always looks the same. And I think especially when you have kids with challenges, with disabilities, that's really important to have as a value for your family, that everybody in this family gets what they need. And that may not always look the same. But, also the thing, one of the things that you talked about was like family time. And I think that's an important barometer and value that most parents I work with have, that gets totally sidelined in the quest to get all of the school stuff done and do all of the activities and all of the therapies and all of this. And suddenly everybody's burned out and stressed, and, things aren't feeling good in the family dynamics. And it's like, well, you've totally lost that connection. You're so busy, like meeting all of these expectations and doing all of these things that you think you have to do, that you've totally sacrificed quality time together as a family, decompression time for your kids and for you. And I see that as a real issue for a lot of families today.
I do too. And it's really hard when you have multiple kids going multiple directions, and you're so busy, and your partner is busy with their job, and you have things to do. And so, I just think that it's really important to take a look at family time and protect it. I feel like I'm sounding like we were so rigid and had so many rules, but hopefully my flexibility is showing through too. But one time that was not negotiable, particularly as my older ones got into high school, was Sunday afternoon and evening. We tried to have dinner together every single night, and we would adjust it around gymnastics schedules and dance and lacrosse and water polo. And most nights we succeeded. But the one night, as they get to where they're driving and their friends become more important, they're out all the time. But Sunday night was never allowed. Everybody kind of had to be here for Sunday night dinner. Of course, if something major came up, but we didn't go to birthday parties on Sunday nights, and we didn't hang out with our friends on Sunday nights. That was sort of family time. And then just family traditions. I love family traditions. My kids tease me, and my oldest son, his nickname is Will Tradition Swales, because he's 24 and he makes all these traditions with his friends. But when you have family traditions, they are a way of really protecting that family time and creating special memories. And I do think, back to your question about boundaries, is that you have to be really clear, really kind, and unapologetic. I did not apologize to people when we missed things. I mean, I might say, I'm sorry, we can't make it, but Sunday night is our family time. And then I let it go. I didn't carry it around with me, because there were 6 days of the week that we were accessible to other people, or our kids could go to parties, or they could. But that one time, I was really clear, really kind, and pretty unapologetic about this comes first.
That's so challenging for people to do. And so let's talk about a couple of specific things around boundaries with that. So let's say parents realize that the way the school is handling homework for their child is just not working. The child's bringing all this work home. It's creating a lot of discord. The quality of their family time together in the evenings is sacrificed. Maybe their child isn't able to engage in other activities that align with their family values, like having time to play outside or do a sport or whatever. And I know you and I have both navigated this personally with our own kids. And I would love to have you share, because this is an area, anything related to the school, but particularly on homework, where I think parents feel like, well, I can't set a boundary around that. Like, we don't have any control here. We're just at the mercy of whatever comes home in our child's backpack. And I'd love to have you speak to how you have thought about or set boundaries around that in your own life, and how you recommend for parents to do that.
Yeah, I think when you start to see that your family is spiraling out of control or out of balance, you have to take a step back and say, what is this? What is happening here? Is it homework? Are we on too many travel teams? Are we socially overextended? But to talk about the homework or the school projects part is, I have seen that. And I've shared with you that, one of the things we opted out of once was science fair. Our school did a big science fair every year, like from 2nd through 5th grade. And it had just gotten too much, and it was causing a lot of discord in our family. and a lot of stress and a lot of aggravation. And I simply made an appointment with the person who was in charge of science fair at our school. And I went in and I explained it. And, my husband is a scientist. We belong to the Science Museum. Our children are getting lots of science. I didn't feel like we needed to do another science fair project. I didn't feel like it fit. We didn't have the time. It was just causing stress. And I went in just like I'm talking to you. And I explained what our situation was and why it didn't fit. And I said, we're not going to be participating in it this year. We're going to opt out. And I looked up, I did the research to know that that was possible. Even if your school district doesn't state that it's possible, though, you can still always ask and make it possible. They don't get to tell you what you do at home. But I, in my case, brought that in and said, I see that anything done outside of school can't count toward their grade. It doesn't have to be graded. So we discussed other options, and we came up with an option that my daughter would research something she was interested in scientifically and do a little presentation in front of the class. If she had major anxiety, I think this was fourth grade, about speaking in front of the class at fourth grade, I would have said, well, could she write a paper instead? Or, I don't know. But do you kind of look at what is best? And, not that we're trying to get our kids out of things that they're going to benefit from. It's looking at what is the benefit cost ratio. And one of my big things is I personally do not believe that kids should be on screens when the school day ends to do more work. And so we opted out of any homework that was involved on screens. I was in favor of them reading. I was in favor of them practicing their math facts, going through flashcards. I was not in favor of them of playing math games and doing reading games online. I wanted them outside. I wanted them engaging in the real world, talking to me, talking to their siblings, talking to their friends. I wanted them to have time for those other activities. And similarly, at that stage, I went into the teacher and I just said, at our scheduled parent conference, I'm not comfortable with my kids being on added screen time. So we'll do spelling homework, but we're going to do paper and pencil spelling homework. We'll write our sentences rather than playing the spelling games online. And, when you go in with that, be kind, be clear, be unapologetic, it worked. It worked for me. And it works for the parents I work with. It's when you go in ranting and raving and trying to undermine the administrators or change everything that you really are going to come across opposition.
Yeah, I agree. And that's been my experience as well. And, I think for parents to be aware of, you can have control over these things and you can collaborate with schools or whoever you're dealing with to come up with a plan that's going to better meet the needs of your child and your family. It should never be the case that, homework or science fair or sports or whatever else undermines and sabotages the values that you really have for your family, for your child in that mission of raising them to be the kind of person that you want to be. And, the boundary setting around that can be hard. And I love that you have given some examples of how you talk about that, to be clear, to be kind, but unapologetic. And that's tough. Another piece where I see this boundary, stuff come up is maybe with parents in relation to other family members or friends, or even social media comment sections or whatever. And you had a really lovely post about that recently around, is where we're spending our energy, our emotional energy and our time aligned with the values that we have for ourselves, our family, for our kids? Or are we allowing ourselves to get drawn into, the arguments, the negotiations, the gritting our teeth and smiling with our mother-in-law, even though we don't want to be saying, are we allowing other people and other things to really take over our emotions and our time? And then that gets in the way of living out the values that we have. And so I'd love to hear your opinion on that, if you see that as an issue also, and maybe some thoughts about how parents can set boundaries around that. If they notice that, wow, I am not having good, I am getting sucked into everyone's everything, and I am sacrificing my own beliefs or values or how I want to spend my time or don't spend my time, for the sake of other people?
I love that question. And this kind of goes back to the last question and the prior question. And this one is, I wrote down one of the little tricks, and I don't know where I got it, but I wrote it down as we were talking, is to start out, whether it's with the teacher or your mother-in-law. I know we both want what's best for John.
Love it.
I know you want him to succeed the best in the classroom, and that's what I want too. Just like at the very beginning, we were talking about getting parents on the same team rather than butting heads and being in opposition. Get the teacher on your team. I know you want what's best for my daughter too, and she has dyslexia. Yes. So spelling on a screen is not best for her. Mother-in-law, I know you want what's best for our kids, and waking up in their own bed on Christmas morning and then coming over to your house later in the day is really what's best for them. So start with the presumption that the other person wants what is best for your relationship too, and tell them that. Remind them that, because we all forget.
So good.
Yeah.
It's so good. Such a practical, tangible. You said that, and I was like, yeah, that's it frames it in a way that just takes so much of the air out of like contentiousness, or it's like, we have a shared goal, whether they think they do or not. As you said, say it anyway. You're framing it that way. You're giving them the benefit of the doubt. And I think that is so powerful then, to parents being able to set the boundaries they want to set around that with less guilt.
Yeah. But then kind of like, I think we all do this sometimes. My body gives me a very clear signal, unfortunately, when I'm feeling too much adrenaline. I used to think it was just when I was anxious, but I cough.
Yep.
That's why I've been sipping the water the whole time. It happens when I'm excited, like I am now to talk to you. It happens when I'm stressed. It happens when my nervous system is getting dysregulated. And so for me, it's taken me 50 years to figure that out. Honestly, it's kind of a new symptom, but my body tells me when I feel that little cough, that little tickle in my throat, I step back and I think, okay, this is triggering something in me. It's like I said, sometimes it's good. Sometimes I'm just really excited, like right now, to talk to you, and I'm happy. But sometimes I'm like, this conversation is not healthy for me. This is not good for me. This is making me anxious. This is making me stressed. And I think today our society is so on edge, Nicole. Everything's an argument. Everything's a battle. I mean, you can see it on the most, simple Instagram post, or the most simple thing, like everybody's fighting about everything. And, years ago, I would get pulled in. Years ago, when I was younger, like I really felt like I had to prove my point. I really felt like I needed to be right or to say the last word, and I would engage. And now I feel like there's no point. So I ask myself, will I remember this tomorrow? Will I remember this next week? Am I going to change the other person's mind? Is it worth my time to engage online or in real life with someone I don't know, or someone that's not really important to me? It happened very recently with a very good friend, and I really debated about whether to share this, but I'm going to share it because I think every single person listening can feel this, whatever side you're on. So I'm not making a judgment about sides, but recently someone reached out to me, a really good long-term friend, about their opinion versus my opinion on masks and vaccines. And at first I didn't respond. I just ignored the messages because I didn't want to get involved or engaged, but they weren't stopping. And so finally I reached out and I said, I love you. I love so much about you. I love our friendship, but I don't agree with you on this. And us talking about it, I'm probably not going to change your mind, and you're probably not going to change my mind. And I try to remember all the things I love about you, and I would not want this to hurt our relationship. So let's just not talk about it. And I didn't even want to say, let's agree to disagree, because that's still giving the spotlight to the disagreement. It's still focusing on how we're different and what we see differently. And, I saw a quote recently, like, it's really hard to hate someone when you look in their eyes or when you look at their heart. And you can really disagree with somebody and still really love them. And so that's what I've tried to do. Now, having said that, sometimes the issues are so big that the relationship is not worth it. I've had a client who has a very, very racist family member, and she cannot, in her own ethical way, be in relationship with this person who is really, really racist. And so, yes, sometimes you have to end the relationship. But if you can look at all the things you love about the person and just put that other thing up on the shelf, then you can kind of keep moving forward. And you can do that with a person online. You can do that with a person, your mother-in-law. You can do that with your spouse. Remind yourself of the things about them that you really do love.
Such powerful insight. And I appreciate you sharing that example. I think this is exactly what we need a whole lot more of in the world right now. And I think a lot of the parents listening have experienced this because of having kids with, sometimes very severe challenges. This, sense of being in opposition, or everybody having opinions, or, having to justify or whatever. And this idea that, we don't have to engage with all of it. We can listen to our bodies, the signals that our body is sending. We can step back and really think about when and how we engage, and we can set boundaries around people or topics or things for the good of ourselves and our kids. And I think that's really, really wise advice and a really practical approach. So I appreciate you sharing that.
I want to say one more thing about it. And this, everyone can interpret this and substitute this for whatever their belief system is. But a long time ago, a friend said to me, Kim, you have an audience of one. And for me, personally, that's God. For other people, it may be their spouse, it might be their family, it might be the universe, who knows? But think of who your quote unquote audience is and check in with that. So for me, I say, I use this example in a lot of podcasts, but my middle son is taking a break from college. And I've had so many people say, how can you let him do that? How can you let him do that? And that's a whole nother conversation I won't go into, but I've come to accept it. But I shared this with you actually after our last talk. I've kind of come to say to people, do you think God really cares if he has a college degree? So for me, that was a part of my way of making peace with it. Like, I have to think of, who am I actually accountable to? For me, it's myself, my immediate family, and God. For other people, that looks different. And I have no judgment of how that looks for you, but ask yourself that question, like, who are you accountable to? You're not accountable to your neighbor. You're not accountable to the principal. You're not accountable to your parents or your mother-in-law or anybody else. You're accountable to really your immediate people. And if you are doing right by them, you're doing right.
Oh, so good, Kim. You and I could spend hours talking and talking. I know we have to wrap up, and this has been so great. So many things we covered, but some really good themes that emerged throughout. So I just know that this was so valuable for all of our listeners. I want to make sure that they know where they can find out more information about you, your work, the things you're doing in the world.
So I have a podcast called Connecting with Dr. Kim Swales. And I think if people like your podcast, they'll like mine. We're very aligned and talk about similar things. My podcast is pretty new. I think I'm on episode 44 or 45, but it's doing really well. And we talk about connection in everything, in food, in marriage, in parenting, in friendship, siblings, any way that you connect. And I think that's so important in the world. I have a professional Instagram page that is at Dr. Kim Swales, and I post parenting, relationship, marriage, friendship, and just kind of life, all the things kind of we're talking about, a lot about boundaries, And then I have a website, kimswales.com, which is growing. So I'll be posting articles on there, but it has links to all the podcasts. And mostly I'm in private practice. And so a lot of my time is spent there, but it's a seed for kind of everything else that I write about and talk about. I see what my clients are struggling with, and then that's what I kind of try to help everybody else with.
Absolutely. So definitely go. Kim's Instagram is great. Go check her out on Instagram. Definitely subscribe to her podcast so you don't miss those episodes. Thank you, Kim, so much for taking the time to be with us today. So appreciate you, what you're doing in the world, and for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you. I'm a big fan of yours, and just am very grateful to talk to you today.
Thank you. And thanks as always to all of you for being here and for listening. We'll catch you back here next time.